know, one of the things that revolutionary movements have to offer young people is a sense of romantic adventure. I mean, if you're working at 7-Eleven in a dead-end job and you're offered an adventure, the chance to demonstrate dramatically for a messianic cause, especially if you're young, that's going to call to something deep inside you and excite you, because everyone needs a higher purpose, and that longing can be addressed by romantically inclined ideologues, but there are better ways of addressing that longing, I believe, and there's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's a tremendous adventure in that. It's a demanding ethical striving, and it's a form of responsibility to pay attention to what you say and to only say things that you believe to be true. And there's insane adventure in that, because you have no idea what's going to happen if you do that. You entice people into adopting ethical responsibility by pointing out to them in story and perhaps to the degree you're capable by example that there isn't anything more interesting or meaningful that they could possibly do. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. And I think that's part of the reason that my books and lectures have proved popular. I'm making a case for some things, I suppose, that you might regard as obvious, at least when viewed from a certain perspective. When I was talking to large live audiences, I noted that one topic in particular would bring the audience to a dead silent halt constantly, and that was when I made a rhetorical case for the relationship between responsibility and meaning. And you need a meaning in life. You need a purpose to sustain you through the catastrophe of life, through the suffering of life. You need a meaning. It's not optional. And the deeper the meaning, the better. And it's definitely the case that people find that meaning primarily in the adoption of responsibility. And that case isn't being made well in our culture, especially not to young people. There's a hunger, a mass hunger for that idea. It's better than happiness, that meaning. It's deeper than happiness. Happiness is fleeting. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. Meaning that comes along with the adoption of heavy responsibility, that's sustaining through good times and bad. It's always the case that the best story wins. The dragon wagged his tail happily when Billy patted its head. Billy went downstairs to tell his mother. "There's no such thing as a dragon," said Billy's mother, and she said it like she meant it. "There's no such thing as a dragon," said Billy's mother, and she said it like she meant it. "There's no such thing as a dragon." There's no such thing as a dragon. There's no such thing as a dragon. such thing as a dragon. Now, the next thing you might wonder is, how often have you actually gone into a house where there's a dragon? You've all encountered dozens of houses that were filled right to the rafters with various dragons, all of which were being studiously ignored by the people who inhabited the house. Billy went back to his room and began to dress. The dragon came close to Billy in a friendly manner and wagged its tail, but Billy didn't pat it. If there's no such thing as something, it's silly to pat it on the head. Billy washed his face and hands and went down to breakfast. The dragon went along. It was bigger now, almost the size of a dog. Billy sat down at the table. The dragon sat down on the table. This sort of thing was not usually permitted, but there wasn't much Billy's mother could do about it. She'd already said there's no such thing as a dragon. 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 And if there's no such thing, you can't tell it to get down off the table. Mother made some pancakes for Billy, but the dragon ate them all. Mother made some more, but the dragon ate those too. Mother kept making pancakes until she ran out of batter. Billy only got one of them, but he said that's all he really wanted anyway. One time, an acquaintance of ours brought their son over to be babysat at our house. His nanny had just been in a car accident, so he was being shunted from house to house while his parents went off to work. He didn't have a very good reputation, this kid. He was about 4. He came over to our house and his mother in the morning, and she dropped him off, and she said, well, he probably won't eat all day, but that's all right. And I thought, no, he's 4. If he doesn't eat all day, that's not all right. It isn't all right that he doesn't eat. So then you think, well, maybe there's some sort of dragon associated with this child. There's no such thing as a dragon. 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 So I came back at noon. My wife had taken care of the children. Other kids were playing in the living room, and he was standing in the porch, sort of in the corner, wandering around back and forth. And I looked at him and I thought, that's not so good. So I kind of poked him. I was poking him, trying to get him to play, and he had this mask of a face on, unhappy. And I'd poke him and he'd kind of jerk away and all that. I couldn't get him to smile. I couldn't get him to play, and I thought, that's not good. That's not good. Because he's 4. Like, he should have, acted unhappy for 2 or 3 pokes and then kind of laughed, and then we would kind of get into it. So then we had lunch. All the kids were at the table and they were eating, and he wasn't eating, and so she was trying to feed him. And so we were watching him very carefully, and she'd bring up the spoon to his mouth and he'd move his head back and forth, to refuse it. About a 9-month-old would do that. That's their first trick. Something happened when he was 9 months old and he never really got beyond that. My wife was fairly persistent with the spoon, and he'd get annoyed and, squawk a bit. She'd put some food in and then he'd swallow it. And then as soon as he took a little bit of food, she'd pat him and tell him that he was being a good kid. And she meant it. It was not a game. Like, she was really intent on getting this kid to have lunch. What was cool, as she kept patting him on the head and telling him he was a good kid, he was opening his mouth more often, even though he was still moving his head back and forth. It took about 10 minutes or so, and she'd fed him the whole bowl of chicken stew, and she showed him, and he said, look, you're a good boy, you ate all of it. Look, you're a good boy, you ate all of it. That horrible mask that he was wearing, that mask of unhappiness, it just fell off of him. And he had this great smile. It was just made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, because you could see that was the first damn thing that he'd been allowed to succeed at. There's no such thing as a dragon. 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 followed my wife around like a puppy dog. Like he was one step behind her, and then we went downstairs into the basement and we were watching TV, and he climbed up in her lap and he grabbed onto her, just wrapped around her, you know. And then his mother came home and she came downstairs and she took one look at this kid wrapped around my wife and she said, "Oh, super mom." Grabbed and walked out, and I thought, that was a horrible thing to see. One day with that kid, you'd fix him up. It was one positive experience was enough to bring him out of his shell. It's okay that he doesn't eat. It's okay that he stands in the corner and doesn't play with the other kids. It's okay that he's miserable and unhappy. It's like, hey, guess what? That's not okay. It's not even a little bit okay. By the time Billy came back downstairs, the dragon had grown so much he filled the hall. Billy had to go around by way of the living room to get to where his mother was. "I didn't know dragons grew so fast," said Billy. "There's no such thing as a dragon," said Mother firmly.
There ain't no such thing. There ain't no such thing as a dragon.
Cleaning the downstairs took Mother all morning. What with the dragon in the way and having to climb in and out of windows to get from room to room. By noon, the dragon filled the house. Its head hung out the front door, its tail hung out the back door, and there wasn't a room in the house that didn't have some part of the dragon in it. When the dragon awoke from his nap, he was hungry. The bakery truck went by. The smell of fresh bread was more than the dragon could resist. He ran down the street after the bakery truck. The house went along, of course, like the shell on a snail. When Mr. Bixby came home for lunch, the first thing he noticed was that his house was gone. Luckily, one of the neighbors was able to tell him which way it went. Mr. Bixby got in his car and went looking for the house. He studied all the houses as he drove along. Finally, he saw one that looked familiar. Billy and Mrs. Bixby were waving from an upstairs window. Mr. Bixby climbed over the dragon's head onto the porch roof and through the upstairs window. "How did this happen?" Mr. Bixby asked. "It was the dragon," said Billy. "There's no such thing," Mother started to say.
There ain't no such thing. There ain't no such thing as a dragon. There ain't no such thing. There ain't no such thing as a dragon.
"There is a dragon," Billy insisted, "a very big dragon." And Billy patted the dragon on the head. The dragon wagged its tail happily. Then, even faster than it had grown, the dragon started getting smaller. Soon it was kitten size again. "I don't mind dragons this size," said Mother. "Why did it have to grow so big?" "I'm not sure," said Billy. "I think it just wanted to be noticed."
There ain't no such thing. There ain't no such thing as a dragon. There ain't no such thing. There ain't no such thing as a dragon.
One of the oldest dramatic representations we know of is St. George and the Dragon. Dragon lives in the ground, chased there by heroes of a previous generation, now and then re-emerging. Kills people, right? These are skulls around its lair. Threatens the integrity of the community, like everything unexpected does. Hero comes out, slays the dragon, frees the treasure. Dragons hoard gold because the thing you most need is always to be found where you least want to look. Comes out, slays the dragon, frees the treasure. Hero comes out, slays the dragon, frees the treasure. Dragons hoard gold because the thing you most need is always to be found. Dragons hoard gold. The thing you most This is a dream my 5-year-old nephew had. Now, you gotta get the context of this dream, right? Year after this dream, parents were divorced, so there were dragons in the house. He was about 4 at this time. He was running around the house with this little plastic knight helmet on and a sword. He was zipping around killing things with it. Doing this all the time. And even when he went to sleep at night, he'd put the sword by his pillow, knight helmet on his pillow. Now, every night, or every second night, or every third night, for 6 months, he'd been waking up screaming. So I was there one night when he woke up screaming. Next morning I said, well, did you dream anything? And so he launched into this story. He said, He was in this field, and these little creatures, like dwarf, were coming up to him, and they didn't have any arms, they just had legs. They had big beaks, and they were covered with hair and grease, and on top of their head was a cross. And there's lots and lots of these dwarfs, and they were jumping on him with their beaks, biting him. We all looked at him and thought, well, it's no wonder you're waking up screaming, right? I mean, you know, that doesn't sound so good. And then he said, well, wait, there's more, right? Back in the distance, there's a dragon. You might as well go after the dragon. Go after the dragon. You might as well go after the dragon. Go after the dragon. And the dragon is puffing out fire and smoke. Fire and smoke. Fire, fire and smoke. And every time he puffs out fire and smoke, it turns into these dwarfs. Big problem, right? Just like the problem of the Hydra in Greek mythology. Cut off one head, 7 more appear. What are you going to do about these dwarfs? Kill one, big deal. 10 more are coming. What can you do about that? In a legal trial, that would have been an inadmissible question. That's called leading the witness. Because what I told him was, despite the horror of this situation, you maybe could do something about it. And he said, ha, I'd take my sword, I'd get my dad. That's a good idea, right? There's the real dad, and then there's the tradition dad, right? You might as well have your father by your side if you're going to go into battle. I'd take my sword, I'd get my dad, I'd go to where the dragon was. I'd jump up on his head, I'd poke both of his eyes out with the sword, I'd go down his throat to the place where the fire comes out, I'd cut a piece of that box out, and I'd use it as a shield. Wow! That's unbelievable. Unbelievable that he could do that. It's perfect, right? There's no sense going after the dwarves, because there's thousands of them. You might as well go after the dragon. Go after the dragon. You might as well go after the dragon. Go after the dragon. What happens if you go after the dragon? You get a piece of it. Piece of its center nature. Piece that can defend you against anything, including other dragons. What if this was the case, evolutionarily speaking or religiously speaking? What if we were adapted to the world? You know, what if it's not the simple place of dead objects that we think it is? What if it's something a lot more alive, a lot more like a story? What if the story is something like this? You have absolutely everything you need, but you have to use all of it. If you run away from any of it, you don't get that piece of the dragon. If you miss even one piece, there's a chink in your armor. There's a place where you're vulnerable. If you make even one mistake, you lessen yourself. If you lessen yourself, you're going to run away more. Not only that, when someone wants to lean on you, they're not going to be able to lean on you because you'll just fall over. What if it was the case that we were adapted to the world, really adapted to it, so that if we made full use of all the talents we had, we'd be okay? What if it was the case that if we set out consciously to never run away from something we know we shouldn't run away from, that everything would be all right? Well, you can think whatever you want to think, but this is what I think. I think it's bloody amazing that that little kid's book had all that information in it. And so you might ask yourself, if that information isn't true, how the hell did it get there? That's it. You might as well go after the dragon. Go after the dragon. You might as well go after the dragon. Go after the dragon. You might as well go after the dragon. Go after the dragon. You might as well go after the dragon. Go after the dragon.